Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Good morning and happy Thursday. And in today's update, we're going to break down exactly what's happening across the crypto market right now. Because honestly, there are quite a few moving pieces that you need to be paying attention to, especially if you are actively watching Cardano, Bitcoin, and the broader altcoin market. So make sure you stick with this entire breakdown, because there are some important signals forming here that could shape what we see going into the weekend and beyond. Now, before we dive deeper into the analysis, this content is for educational and informational purposes only and should not be considered financial advice. Always do your own research before making any investment decisions. The cryptocurrency market is highly volatile and involves significant risk. I am not responsible for any financial losses or decisions you make based on this content. I want to quickly remind you that this content is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not financial advice. Always do your own research before making any investment decisions. The crypto market is highly volatile and involves risk, and I am not responsible for any financial decisions you make based on this video. Now, with that being said, let's jump straight into it, because yesterday we actually saw a really strong bounce back in the latter part of the session. And not only that, we managed to hold those gains overnight, which is definitely something the market needed after the recent volatility. And heading into Thursday, things are actually looking relatively stable on the surface. But at the same time, we do have a key report coming out today that could introduce some short-term volatility. So this is definitely a moment where the market is a little bit cautious and waiting for a catalyst to determine the next move. And that's why you're seeing a bit of a mixed bag across the crypto market right now, where some assets are in the green while others are slightly in the red. And specifically, when we look at Cardano, ADA is actually up around 0.85% on the day, which shows some relative strength compared to other assets. And what's interesting here is that price action has settled back into the same range that we were dealing with earlier in the week, around Monday and Tuesday, which suggests that the market is currently in a consolidation phase and is really just searching for stability as we approach the weekend. And typically, when you see this type of price behavior, it means traders are waiting for confirmation before committing to larger positions. Now, one important detail that cannot be ignored is that trading volume is actually increasing heading into today, even compared to yesterday. And this is a key signal, because rising volume during a consolidation phase often indicates that a bigger move could be building behind the scenes, meaning the market is getting a little bit restless or antsy as we move forward. Now shifting focus over to Bitcoin, because as always, Bitcoin is the leader of the market, and whatever it does will heavily influence altcoins, including Cardano. We can clearly see that BTC is currently fighting against resistance and attempting to push back above a key level that it briefly broke above yesterday. However, it faced rejection twice at that level, which shows that sellers are still active there. And the big question now is whether Bitcoin can gather enough strength to break through that resistance convincingly, because if it does, that momentum will very likely spill over into the altcoin market and give assets like ADA the push they need to move higher. But if Bitcoin fails again and gets rejected, we could see continued sideways movement or even a short-term pullback across the market. So this is definitely a critical level to watch. Now, beyond the charts, we also have to talk about the macro environment, because that is playing a huge role in overall market sentiment right now. And there are ongoing developments coming out of the Middle East that are adding another layer of uncertainty. And while some reports might suggest potential de-escalation, the broader sentiment in the market still leans toward the possibility of further escalation. And this uncertainty is important because it directly impacts global energy markets. And we are already seeing signs of stress there, with fuel prices reaching levels that we haven't seen in quite some time, especially in certain regions. And if this situation worsens, it could lead to a more significant energy crisis, which would have ripple effects across global markets, including crypto. So at this stage, what we are really dealing with is a market that is caught between optimism from recent price recovery and caution due to macroeconomic and geopolitical uncertainty. And that's why you're seeing this kind of indecisive price action. Now moving on to one of the more exciting updates, specifically for Cardano, there has been a bullish outlook presented by analysts and investors that is starting to gain attention, with one projection suggesting that ADA could be setting up a structure similar to what we saw before the massive 2021 rally. And based on that structure, there is a potential target being discussed around 2 or 91 cents, which would represent a significant move of roughly 1,000% from lower levels. And while that might sound extremely bullish and attractive, it's very important to approach these projections with patience and realism, because the market conditions today are very different compared to what we saw in 2021. And one of the biggest differences is retail participation. Because since 2022, retail adoption has largely been flat and has not returned in a meaningful way. And instead, what we are seeing is that the market is being driven more by institutional players, governments, and large enterprises. And these entities have primarily been focusing on the top-tier assets like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and XRP, which means that capital has been concentrated at the top of the market rather than flowing evenly across all altcoins. However, this does not mean that projects like Cardano are being ignored. In fact, it actually creates a long-term opportunity because as the market matures and expands, institutional interest will likely broaden beyond just the top few assets. And this is where Cardano could benefit significantly due to its strong infrastructure and long-term development approach. And we are already starting to see early signs of that shift happening. For example, a major development involves a large asset management firm with over $1.7 trillion in assets under management, filing updates for an active crypto ETF that includes ADA as one of its components, specifically making up around 3.37% of the benchmark index. And this ETF is expected to trade on the New York Stock Exchange ARCA, pending approval from the SEC. And if approved, this would mark a significant milestone for Cardano's institutional adoption because it would provide a new avenue for large-scale investors to gain exposure to ADA in a regulated environment. And historically, we have seen how impactful ETFs can be for asset classes because they tend to bring in long-term capital that is less likely to sell during short-term volatility, effectively reducing circulating supply and contributing to price stability over time. And that's why the market is closely watching these developments, because the approval of more crypto ETFs could fundamentally change the dynamics of supply and demand in this space. And overall, when you put all of this together, what we are seeing right now is a market that is stabilizing after recent volatility, building momentum beneath the surface, and waiting for a catalyst, whether that comes from macro events, Bitcoin breaking key resistance, or major institutional developments like ETF approvals. And for Cardano specifically, the fundamentals continue to strengthen in the background, even if price action remains relatively slow in the short term. So the key takeaway here is patience, because these types of setups often take time to fully develop before making a significant move. And if you are watching this market closely, you want to focus on the key levels, monitor volume, and stay aware of the broader macro environment because all of these factors are going to play a role in what happens next. And with that being said, if you found value in this breakdown, make sure you go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel because we are covering these markets every single day and you don't want to miss what's coming next.